I'll turn to CNN senior international correspondent Dan Rivers.
President Obama's foreign policy pivot to Asia, relations with South Korea have never been more important or better. Newly elected President Park Geun-hye has already met Secretary of State John Kerry, but this will be her first official meeting with President Obama, a chance to celebrate 60 years of the US-South Korean alliance. But the trip will also be a personal milestone in President Park Geun-hye's troubled family history. Her campaign videos show the large scar across her face sustained after a razor attack in 2006. Her father, President Park Chung-hee, was a controversial leader of South Korea in the 1970s, reviled by some as a dictator, celebrated by others as an economic genius. He survived 2 assassination attempts. During one attempt in 1974, his wife, President Park Geun-hye's mother, was shot dead. Park Geun-hye became de facto First Lady next to her dad, the bereaved president. But in 1979, he was also murdered by Korea's top spy. It makes Park Geun-hye's rise to the top all the more remarkable.
And if you take a look at Park Geun-hye, the first female president of South Korea, and Barack Obama, the first black president of the United States, these two are really unprecedented cases representing 2 very powerful countries and 2 strong allies over the course of the past few decades. So I think the chemistry and the dynamics will be very much in line with each other, and I think there'll be some positive results afterwards.
President Park grew up in this official residence, the Blue House. Now, as its incumbent, she's making the highly symbolic visit to the White House. 60 years after the Korean War, a conflict which never technically ended. During that time, America's alliance has been crucial, especially during times of tension, like the last couple of months. As a lawmaker, Park Geun-hye has met former North Korean leader Kim Jong-il. But so far, she's not met his son, Kim Jong-un, a man whose leadership has so far been characterized by this year's rising tensions and aggressive rhetoric towards the United States. It makes President Park's visit to Washington all the more symbolic, cementing an alliance that was forged 60 years ago during the Korean War. The South Korean government has a slogan for this visit: bound by trust, forward together.
Authorities in Boston have said that the body of alleged bomber Tamerlan Tsarnaev is not welcome there. Now a controversy is brewing about where the deceased suspect should go. CNN's Gary Tagman takes a look at the surprisingly difficult ordeal of burying the notorious.
Protesters are putting on the pressure, picketing outside a funeral home near Boston to say, "Don't bury Tamerlan Tsarnaev here." One sign says, "Bury the garbage in the landfill." The funeral home director, who currently has the body, isn't sure what he should do next.
What do we do with this guy?
One alternative, cremation. Some of America's most notorious criminals, like Timothy McVeigh, Jeffrey Dahmer, and Ted Bundy, were cremated. Serial killer Bundy's ashes were scattered in an undisclosed location in Washington state. The ashes of serial child killer and cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer, who was beaten to death by an inmate, were shared between his parents. Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh, who was executed in the federal death chamber in Indiana, had his ashes scattered in an undisclosed location by his lawyer. And further back in history, there's Adolf Hitler. After he killed himself in 1945, his body was burned by Soviet forces, leaving no trace. But for a Muslim, cremation is not an option, according to experts.
Cremation is not only not allowed, but it's actually forbidden. So cremation would mean that something happened to this man which would be outside the bonds of Islam itself, and that would be controversial, certainly in some circles.
Another possibility, burial at sea. That was used for Osama bin Laden after he was killed by U.S. Special Forces. The advantage? No marked grave, nowhere for protesters or supporters to find him. Which brings us back to burial. After the execution of Saddam Hussein, he was buried, but in relatively friendly territory, near his hometown of Tikrit. John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated President Lincoln, is buried in the family plot in Baltimore, although his resting place is not individually marked. Lee Harvey Oswald, who assassinated President Kennedy, is buried in a marked grave in Fort Worth, Texas, but he hasn't exactly rested in peace. His original tombstone was stolen, and his original coffin was auctioned. And then there's a strange case of another horrible man, John Wayne Gacy, convicted of killing at least 33 boys and young men in the Chicago area. His family has always been ambiguous about whether he was cremated or buried, and to this day, it's still not publicly known. Gary Tuckman.
Well, time now to take another break. When we come back, we'll take a look at sports. Stay tuned in. Hello and welcome to another week of the Fatu Show. Welcome back. Time now to join Fatu Jasser for a look at the sports news. Welcome.
The 8 remaining teams in the NBA playoffs have now all played at least one game in the latest round, and there have been some big surprises, with star player Derrick Rose injured. Most of us keep writing up the Chicago Bulls' chances of becoming NBA champions, but we may have to think again after they produced a bit of a shock win over the current title holders, the Miami Heat. We have details in this report.
James and the Miami Heat were hot favourites, the team with the best regular season record, 39-4 at home, 41 wins out of 43 before last night's loss. The Heat up by 2 in the fourth, James making that as part of his 24-point haul. Slowly the Bulls edging ahead though, Jimmy Butler marking LeBron well and scoring 21 points himself. And let's take a look at Nate Robinson in the final minute of the game. He racked up a game-high 27 points. Chicago's fourth quarter surge, sealing a 93-86 victory in Miami. They stay in Florida for Game 2 on Wednesday.
I feel like our team, the character that we believe that we have, it's all about being tough. You know, we're always going to be the underdogs, and we take pride in that. You know, everybody can overlook us, but we feel like we're good enough to hang with a lot of these teams.
In the West, Steph Curry and the Warriors were looking to upset Tim Duncan and the Spurs, the same way they'd surprisingly taken out the Nuggets in the previous round. And they led by 18 points at one stage before a desperate comeback from the Spurs. Manu Ginobili and Danny Green combining for that late three. This one into overtime then. Curry with a massive game-high 44 points and 11 assists, getting it to Kent Bazemore here as the Warriors go ahead in the second period of overtime. But it was San Antonio's Argentine star, Ginobili, who produced the bit of magic that sealed the game, a 129-127 win, and the coach was just left shaking his head.
I went from trading him on the spot to wanting to cook him breakfast tomorrow. That's the truth. And when I talk to him and say, Manu, he goes, this is what I do. That's what he's going to tell me. So I stopped coaching him a long time ago.
Well, that's all in sports. Back to you, Fat Camera.
Well, thank you very much, Fatu. And before we go, reminder of our headlines. The Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of the Gambia's latest quarterly report has provided a mixed assessment of the Gambian economy in terms of performance, challenges, and outlook for the future. The National Alliance for Food Security has trained members on ways of improving agricultural productivity and food security. Police in Cleveland have arrested 3 men following the discovery of 3 women who were missing for more than a decade, presumably by the suspects. And U.S. officials have confirmed North Korea's withdrawal of long-range missiles from a launch site, but there is no shortage of Pyongyang's war rhetoric towards its neighbors. That's all in this edition of the news. Thank you very much for your time. We'll be back, inshallah, at 2200 hours with more news.